When I was in college, my first year of college, 1999, there was a really important news story that came out, and here's what happened. This young African immigrant from Guinea, about 23 years old, came home from work one day. He'd had a really long day. It was late. He had just stopped off to get something to eat. And when he got to his apartment complex in the Bronx, he decided to hang out on the stoop for a little while just to catch some fresh air. It was early in the morning in February. It was crisp outside. He was just hanging out on the stoop, minding his own business, not doing anything. And 4 white police officers cruised by. They were part of this street team that New York City's police department had put together, trying to clean up the streets. And they saw him and identified him as someone who looked like a suspect that they were looking for, a serial rapist, who's since been apprehended, but at the time they had not caught him, and so they thought, that black guy, he looks like the suspect, the description of the suspect. So they called out to him and they said, "NYPD, stop so we can talk to you." And he responded by running as fast as he could. And he ran the opposite direction into his apartment complex building, up the stairs. He was right outside his apartment. It was backlit. And they said, "Put your hands in the air. We want to talk to you." And he reached into his pocket of his jacket to pull out his wallet to show his ID. And when he pulled out his wallet, they thought it was a gun. And they fired a shot. And another shot, and another shot, and another shot, 41 times. And then he was killed. And 19 of those 41 shots struck this kid, this 23-year-old, and he was murdered that night by 4 white police officers. And that was the big news story of the year. Kind of like Trayvon Martin a couple years ago, kind of like Mike Brown and Ferguson this past summer, kind of like Eric Garner in New York this early fall. It was the story that everyone was talking about. And there was a lot of disunity around what happened in this story. A lot of people, mostly brown and black folks, were like, "See, this is another example of police brutality. This is another example of black lives not mattering." And on the other hand, a lot of white folks were like, "Well, why didn't he just stop? I mean, it's his own fault that he got shot up like that 41 times, because when the police said, 'Hey, stop, we want to talk to you,' he should have obeyed them. He should have paid attention. I mean, why would you run from the police? They're there to protect and serve. It even says so on their cars. It says protect and serve. How could you possibly not believe that?" And there was a fractured consciousness in America 16 years ago this month, where there was a division along racial lines on what is the reality in America. That is a great example of how we are divided. Because if you know any black people, or you are a black person, or especially if you know black men in particular, you know that the experience of being a black male in America is really different than the experience of being a white male or a white person or really anybody else. And it's so telling when we aren't paying attention to these differences, that we aren't really listening to each other. We aren't sharing brain space like Paul calls us to do in Philippians 2. Because if you talk to a black guy in America, you'll know that it's a common occurrence, regardless of who you are, to be stopped and frisked for no apparent reason, to be harassed for no apparent reason, to be pulled over in your car for no apparent reason. One recent police statistic that I read said that black and brown men are twice as likely to be pulled over and have their vehicles searched for drugs, even though white men are twice as likely to actually have drugs on their possession when they do get pulled over. There's a difference in the way that people are treated in this country, and it doesn't seem to matter whether you are highly educated and successful, like Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who is a Harvard professor who was arrested and racially profiled by the police outside his home in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or you're one of the 14-year-old black kids who lives on my block in my low-income North Minneapolis neighborhood. It seems to be the case that the reality is the same. So one social psychologist, a colleague of mine, was really interested in this. How is it that this experience with not only the police, but maybe in all of our interactions in America, how is it that it's so different for blacks and for whites, and what can we learn about that? And you know, in this, he decided to put together the study to see, what do average Americans think about black men versus white men? What are the preconceived notions? And so I have some slides to show you how he kind of set up this research study. He had people come into his lab, and he showed them subliminally a picture of a black guy or a white guy. Now, here's an example of one of the pictures of a black guy, just a black face. Now, when I say he showed them a subliminal picture, it means that it was presented so quickly on the computer screen that people were not even able to acknowledge that they had consciously seen it. Turns out you can be conscious even if you don't even know you're conscious. And so you can see things and not know that you're seeing things. And so if something's presented really fast, like less than 300 milliseconds, then you won't actually be able to say you saw something, but on a lower conscious level, your body is able to acknowledge and is affected by that. And so he wanted to kind of prime or get people thinking about race without knowing that they were thinking about race. Because right, most college students who participate in these studies are not going to say, yes, this is what I think about black men and this is what I think about white men. We aren't typically that forthcoming. So he wanted to show people subliminally very quickly, here's a picture of a black guy, here's a picture of a white guy. Of course, they could not even acknowledge they had seen that. And then as soon as he showed that first picture, he followed it up with another picture, a picture of either a gun or a tool. In this case, this is a tool. And that picture was not shown subliminally. It was shown just for a split second, but long enough so people could say, yes, I saw something. And he would say, I know this is quick, I know this is fuzzy, but like, can you just take a quick guess? Just guess, is that a gun or is it a tool? Do you see a gun or do you see a tool? And again, it was shown very quickly, so people had to make an honest to God guess. They weren't quite sure. And what he did is he switched up the pairings. So sometimes they would be presented subliminally a black face, and then a tool, or a white face, and then a tool, or a black face, and a gun, or a black face, and a tool. And so he kept switching it up, and every single time he said, just guess, is it a gun or a tool? Is it a gun or a tool? But each time the gun or tool was subliminally preceded by a black or white face. And he wanted to see, when people have just seen a black face, even if they can't even acknowledge that they saw it, will they misidentify a tool as a gun? Will they make that mistake? When they've just seen a white face, will they misidentify a gun as a tool? And that's actually exactly what he found. He found that when there was a black face associated with a gun, people always saw it as a gun. When there was a black face associated with a tool, people made the mistake of thinking, that's a gun, when really it was a tool. But it was the opposite for white men. When there was a white man who preceded the tool, when there was a white man who preceded the gun, people thought, oh, that's a tool. There's no way that white man would be associated with that gun. I don't associate white men with guns. And he found that the average American, multiple times replicating this study with all sorts of different people, not just white college students, but black college students, Asian college students, all sorts of people, found that we tend to associate black men with danger, with threat, and white men with safety, I guess industriousness. I don't know, they're off to go fix something. That's our assumption. And we have to stop and we have to think about that. Because this is something that we don't do on purpose. This is something that's in the air. This is a great example of how we live in a fallen world, in a world where we don't see the image of God in everyone around us. Instead, we see people as a threat. We see people as someone who might hurt us. We see people as someone who's going to do something dangerous. When I told my brother, who's a graduate student at Yale, about this study, he laughed in a really sarcastic way. And he said, why would anyone even bother doing that study? I could have told them that people look at me like I'm a threat. He's told me countless times that he's walked down the street in New Haven, Connecticut, and someone walking facing him on the sidewalk would see him and then walk to the other side of the street so they could avoid walking right by the black guy. He can talk about the countless times that he's coming home from the library and he gets stopped by the New Haven police because he supposedly matches the description of someone that they're looking for. And every single time he has to have a conversation that basically starts with, "We think you're a criminal." Think about that. Think about how God created us in his image, in God's image. And think about what it might be like to live in this world where every single day people look at you and the first thing they think is not image of God, but criminal, threat. What would that do to your image? What would that do to your identity? How would that drag you down? The thing is, though, is when we have these conversations, we tend to get antsy, we tend to get defensive, we tend to say, well, hey, I'm not doing that. I'm not part of the problem. I don't participate in this system. But this is a system that affects us all. We get these messages from the media. We get these messages from perhaps family members. Sometimes we get these messages even in our history classes when only some parts of the stories are told and other parts are left out. And so every time there's a major national crisis like this one that I told you about with Amadou Diallo, the Ghanaian immigrant who was shot and killed 41 times, or Trayvon Martin, or Eric Garner, or Tamir Rice, or Renisha McBride, the countless names, we see this fractured consciousness in America. We see this division along racial lines. And we don't seem to know what to do about it. You know, oftentimes, whenever there's one of these big crises, I get dozens, sometimes hundreds of emails from well-meaning people who notice. They are like, oh my gosh, there's this huge division in my community, and there's a lot of racial tension, and there's a lot of misunderstanding, and we're so divided. And so they email me looking for advice, but they already have an idea, and it's always the same bad idea. Every single person sends me the same bad idea, and they think, I really want to get like 8 people together, my like 4 white supremacist friends, and then like my 4 black militant friends, and I think we should just have dinner together and just talk it out. And I'm always like, don't do that. Like, someone will die. Like, that is a bad idea, right? We do not want to just bring people together under these sorts of circumstances and hope that they can just duke it out over dinner. That's not going to end well for really anybody. But that just goes to show how wide this divide is and how much it bothers some people, how much it breaks their heart. And I believe it also breaks the heart of God. And so even though these people have perhaps an imperfect idea, I think they're tapping into the broken heart of God, and there's an urgency, and they want to do something about it. I really respect that. You know, looking at Scripture, I believe that this is part of our fallen nature. When I look in Genesis, and I see that even before Adam and Eve are cursed, even before God says, here's serpent, here's what I'm going to do to you. Here, Eve, here's what I'm going to do to you. Here, Adam, here's what I'm going to do to you. You can already see the effects of the fall. You can already see it in the way that they're interacting with each other, the way that they're seeing themselves. They start in this wonderful created world where there's collaboration and there's mutuality, and human beings are working together in unity to make the world a better place. The world is flourishing, and it's because human beings are seeing themselves as created in the image of God, seeing each other as created in the image of God, as essential, as people who we absolutely need and love. And they're in great relationship with God, and they're looking over the earth, and they're taking care of the earth together in harmony and community, being one. The way Paul calls us to in Philippians 2, where he says, be of one mind. Share brain space. Get inside each other's heads. I know you come from different backgrounds. I know you have different races and genders and sexuality and class and educational experiences, but I'm still calling you to be one in the same way that our Trinity is one. In the same way that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, at the beginning of time, before anything happened, were in perfect relationship with each other. We're sharing brain space. We're in unity. That's what I'm calling you to. And that's what it was like at the beginning of the world, with just Adam and Eve in perfect unity, approximating that unity of the Trinity. Trinitarian theologians call it perichoresis. Mutual indwelling or interpenetration, so connected to each other that we really can't even relate in this world without each other. We can't even identify without each other. I am so part of you that I wouldn't even be myself if I weren't connected to you and I weren't acknowledging how much I need you, how much I need your perspective, how much I value your presence in my life. That's what makes me me, being part of this community. That's what we see in the Trinity, and that's what Adam and Eve had in the garden. But then as soon as they believed the lie of the serpent, as soon as they decided, we don't really need God as much as we had thought, we're going to go our own way, then before they're even cursed, you automatically start to see the disintegration of human relationships. And it starts with the way that they see themselves. As soon as they take the bite of that fruit, they realize that they're naked and they're shame, and they no longer see themselves as image bearers in the glory that God has created them. And they no longer see each other as image bearers. And they're like, whoa, you should cover up. You're kind of a bit much. I'm threatened by the way that you look. I'm threatened by who you are. I'm threatened by your identity. Instead of saying, your identity informs mine. It might be different, but I need it. And I want to draw in, and I want to connect with you because I can't even be me without connecting with you. All of a sudden, there's a switch in their brains. There's a switch in their perceptions. And all of a sudden, they're like, whoa, cover up. I don't see the image of God in you. I don't see the image of God in me. And they put on leaves and they hide. And our human relationships from that moment on are marked by distrust. They're marked by shame. They're marked by an absence of the image of God. And then the next thing that happens before they even get cursed, they start to turn on each other. You see division. You see them stepping away from that sharing brain space, that mutual identity, that mutual interpenetration. You see them stepping away from that, and all of a sudden they're blaming each other, and they don't have each other's back. And they're not trying to understand the other person's perspective. It's every man for himself, every woman for herself. It's like, well, hey, if that's your problem, that's your problem. I'm protecting myself. If it's not my reality, then it's not a reality. Your experience doesn't really matter. All that matters is my experience and me making sure I can get mine. And so just in that split second of a moment, we see an inability to see the image of God in each other, and we see a division. And those divisions are still present today. That inability to see the image of God in each other is still present today. And it affects how we look at people who are different than us. people who make a different amount of money than we do, people who are educated in different ways, maybe less formally than the many people in this room who either have college educations or are getting them, maybe look differently racially, maybe have different experiences in the world. And this is due to the fall. So all I can say is, Creator God, forgive us. Thank you.